Hey, I'm Rob from JestaThaRogue.com. I'm going to show you how to play Apocalypse Road. This is a game for 2 to 10 players, plays in about 90 minutes, is designed by Carla and Jeff Horger, and is published by GMT Games. You're in charge of a racing team in a bleak future. Teams earn skins by completing laps or destroying opponents' vehicles by shooting and colliding with them. The team that earns their final skin first is the winner. But before we start, be sure to ram that subscribe button if you haven't already, and don't forget to shoot me a comment. On to setup. Pick one of the 4 tracks and place it on the table. Shuffle the combat, movement and race cards into 3 separate face-down decks. The tracks contain certain gameplay detail that I'll get to as we go, but just know this green-white line is for if you use these tracks to play the sister games Thunder Alley or Grand Prix, so just ignore them for Apocalypse Road. Players select a team and take the team board, car tokens and skin tokens, which are essentially victory points. The player board shows some different information about the cars needed for gameplay. The top is the car's number, the circle is its defence, the number in the middle is its base movement points, and the bottom shows the weapon that car has equipped. In a 2 to 4 player game, players pick 5 cars to start the race. In a 5+ player game, players pick 4 cars of their choice. The rest are kept aside as replacements and may end up in the race later on. Players put 12 of their skin tokens in their team box, or all 15 if you're playing a long game. Shuffle 1 car from each team and draw them into the positions in numerical order on the grid, light side up. Give the player who owns the car in position 1 the start player token, also light side up. Repeat this 1 set at a time until all cars have been placed on the grid. On to gameplay, which consists of 3 steps, with each car activating once. Step 1 is to fill hands. Players simply draw so they have 6 cards in hand from the race deck. Step 2 is the big one, where players perform action segments, activating their car starting with the first player and going clockwise around the table. This section is divided into 3 steps. Firstly, a player will name any of their cars and play a race card from their hand. Secondly, they move that car the number of spaces equal to the car's base movement points plus the speed adjustment shown on the race card. For example, if car 444 plays this card, they will move 6, 4 plus 2. Then flip the car to the other side, which in this turn will be the dark side, to show it's already been activated this turn. Remember, a car can shoot before or after moving, but we've got a lot of movement rules to go through before we get to that. First, the movement basics. Firstly, a car must move its full movement speed either forward or laterally unless the card says otherwise. It can only go diagonally if the movement card allows it and can never go backwards. You can't go into the same space more than once in a movement action, for example, laterally left, then right. Movement costs 1 point per space. Forward is always 1 movement point, even if pushing or colliding. When moving into a corner, the player can choose any of the spaces in front of their current space. Moving laterally also costs 1 movement point per space. It costs 2 movement points to laterally displace a car, pushing that car to the side. Cars displacing to the side of the track are pushed forward. If multiple cars are involved, this will cause a chain where the cars follow into the vacated space left by the one in front. Cars adjacent in the same row are linked and become what is called a race line, meaning your movement could be both pushing and pulling cars at the same time. All linked cars move together as a row depending on the movement card played, and only the active car will be using movement points. If there is a choice of lanes to move into, the active player chooses and cars in the chain follow in the same space. Even if the car at the front of this chain is not owned by the active player will decide where the racing line goes. If a linked row is both in and out of a corner, there are no choices to make. All cars in the line must follow as usual. So there are a lot of different movement types on the race cards. Let's look at them now. Solo movement. Car moves alone with conditional linking in front, signified by the white arrow in front of the car graphic. Conditional linking means the car can link and unlink as they wish while moving, so they can push some cars forward, move laterally, then move forward once more, maybe even pushing a different racing line. Overtake movement works the same as solo movement, but for each movement point the player can choose to swap places with the car in front when moving forward rather than pushing. Line movement links with cars in front and behind to create a racing line and will link to other cars as they join, denoted by the yellow arrow. When using line movement, the car may move laterally before making any forward movement, but once they do start to make forward movement, they can't move laterally again this activation. Pursuit movement can freely move laterally until they link in front. Cars are not linked from behind with pursuit movement, denoted by the red arrow. Lead movement. If you think of pursuit movement as a push, this is a pull. It pulls cars linked at the start of movement only, and new cars will not be linked behind. Unlike pursuit and line movement, lead movement allows you to freely move laterally during movement and link cars follow into the vacated space, which is unique to this movement type, denoted by the green arrow. Lead movement also has conditional linking on the front. Diagonal movement comes in all styles of the other movement types and allows diagonal movement at any time during this activation. Ram movement can be played as either solo or lead, with the exception that when it would move forward into a space containing another car, it stops and performs a collision attack. Collision attacks are not optional. To clarify, a collision attack refers to both ramming from behind and sideswiping. For this, flip over the top combat event card. This will show the damage dealt. In this case, the target shown with the blue car takes 3 damage and the ramming car takes 1 damage. Damage is shown with damage tokens placed on the relevant car on the player board. If the car receives its 6 damage, it's eliminated. Put it in the box for destroyed cars. If the owner of the destroyed car has any cars left in their supply, they can add one to the chute. Place it the same side up as the eliminated car. This way, if the destroyed car hasn't moved this turn, the replacement car can. If it has moved, then the replacement can't move. It just means you're activating the same number of cars each round. If you don't have any spare cars to bring on, you play with fewer cars. There is no limit to the number of cars that could be in the chute. While we're here, let's look at moving out of the chute. The first move is 1 movement point to move laterally, or 2 movement points to laterally displace to exit the chute into any adjacent space. Back to collisions, and if the target was destroyed in the rammer will move into their space. If the card says bulldoze, the rammer will swap places with the target after dealing damage, just like an overtake movement, assuming both cars survive the collision of course. If it says chain, all cars linked in front of the target will also take 1 damage. If the movement card has this icon, after fully resolving any movement including a collision but before shooting, immediately draw and resolve a movement event. These have effects on the race, and I'll get into some that have a wider effect on the game later, but for now, here's an example. Fuel leak deals 1 damage to the active car with no player gaining a skin if that 1 damage eliminates the car. Okay, that's the movement basics. Before we finally get onto shooting, let's look at some stuff on the track. These dashed lines move you directly from the grid area into the space beyond the curve for 1 movement point. They do not count as a space themselves. The rough track means you can't change lanes in this section, even if your event or race card says you can. This section is a jump and trough. The middle lane is the trough. The 2 outer lanes are jumps, and it still counts as a rough dirt track. And you can't choose to drive through the trough. Cars placed in the trough on the same spaces are stacked up, and the first movement points will be used to move laterally out of the trough. Some tracks have a crossover marked with a flash icon. If a car would move into a perpendicular car, stop the movement and deal 1 damage to both cars. A car cannot be laterally displaced in a crossover space and can't be displaced forward into a collision. In this case, the car is not displaced at all. Perpendicular cars can be rammed, but the bulldoze keyword is ignored, and also the overtake action has no effect on a perpendicular car. Finally, we're on to shooting. As I mentioned earlier, this can be done before or after movement, even if the car performed a ram attack. Choose a car in an adjacent space depending on the weapon range. Any weapon that says forward can shoot into the front 3 spaces. For example, car 811 can shoot any of those 3 other cars. Rear is the back 3 spaces, so 25 can shoot the 3 cars in those spaces. A turret can shoot into any adjacent space, shown here by car 444. Once you have picked a legal target for your activated car, draw a combat event card. If the value of the card is lower than the target's defense, it misses and nothing happens. Discard the card. If it is equal to or higher than the target defense, it hits. Remember, some cards have a targeting system that adds +1 to the value of the number on the combat card. If it hits, deal damage shown on the card based on the attacker's weapon using damage tokens. If the damage says spray, the target car and all cars adjacent to the target, including diagonally, take 1 damage without checking their defense stat. If it says suppress, then the target is suppressed. Give them a suppress token to show this. On a suppressed card's next action, they cannot shoot or ram. If they play a movement card with ram, then nothing happens, and at the end of that card's activation, discard the token. If you destroy a car, gain a skin by removing one from your team box. If you destroy your own car with damage from a collision that you initiated, or any time the active player's car is destroyed, no one gets a skin. Movement cards like bottoming out will deal damage to other cars on the track, but will let you know that you do not get a skin for this. You do gain a skin by removing one from your team box whenever one of your cars crosses the start-finish line. After activating a car, flip it over to its other side and play continues clockwise around the table with players selecting and activating one of their cars. A player must pass if they are out of cars to activate, and only if they are out of cars to activate. Once all cars have activated, this phase ends. Step 3 starts with players discarding any unwanted race cards from their hand. Then all players remove a skin from the team box. Unless one player only has 1 skin left, then no skins are removed. Next, change the first player marker to the player with the most damage on active cars, with ties going to the player closest to the current first player's left. The marker must move, so the current start player is never in contention. Flip the first player marker onto the other side to remind everyone if light or dark cards are being activated this round. Then players go back to step 1 and draw back up to 6 cards. Now let's have a look at some movement event cards that have a wider effect on the race, as well as using some tokens that we haven't looked at yet. Spin around and into the weeds both explain very well how the card works and uses the spin around token to show the car is spun off the track. If this happens while in the crossover, you should move the car to the nearest location, either in front or behind the intersection. Similarly, reloading shows you how the reloading tokens are used. Sideswipe may allow you to make a sideways collision attack, and if so, both bulldoze and chain work the same, but laterally in that column. Open road refers to a sector which is a single column on the track. For example, these 3 cars fill all 3 spaces in that sector. The first player to empty their VP pool of skin tokens wins. And that's Apocalypse Road, a card-driven racing and combat game. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, share and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when a new video goes live. You can follow me on Twitter, Insta, Twitch and YouTube at JestaThaRogue and find the blog at JestaThaRogue.com. I've been Rob aka JestaThaRogue and I'll see you soon.